Hello, this is Leisa Coleman, and I wanted to try to do some audio recordings, and I listened to a podcast recently that really inspired me to start my own. I don't always feel like being on camera or being seen, and I thought this could be a way to honor myself in that way and just be able to speak freely without having to be concerned with my appearance. And it can sometimes feel more comfortable to just share with words. And so I'm going to be trying out these audio recordings, and I'll be sharing many things as they arise. Topics such as parenting, unschooling, childcare, spiritual growth. These things are very close to my heart. You can probably hear some wind in the background and my cats. I am sitting outside. It's beautiful to be out in nature where I live and not have children distracting me and coming to me. So that's why you may hear some background noise. And if it doesn't work for this audio, I will reassess for next time. So today there's something I've really been wanting to share, and I haven't known whether to make a YouTube video or write a blog about it. So I thought I would just talk about it instead. And it's the topic of change in our children. So the reason why I like to share about this is because this is a big thing for me in my life as a parent. There's always changes going on in my children. And having 4 children and all different ages, I have a preteen, I have teenagers, and I have adult children. And ever since they were little, they've been in constant change. Their personality, their preferences, their desires, their boundaries. And this has been quite a rocky road for me. And I really want these audios to be more of a personal sharing about my own journey as a parent and how I've overcome the challenges that many of us face being parents. And so I really understand the struggle that parents go through with seeing their child change. I often have parents that will come to me and they will say, I don't know what's happened with my child. There's somebody new. Like, who is this child? And this is quite common in younger children. Like, this can be described by some parents as the terrible twos, or the there's certain milestones or ages where children tend to have a developmental spurt, and they're suddenly doing and saying things that they normally wouldn't. And a lot of parents can be very shocked because they're seeing this innocent, quiet, laid back, compliant, content child, and there's no worry in the world. They go to sleep when they're put down. They eat the food they're given. They don't complain about where they're going or what they're doing. And then it's almost like overnight they're throwing tantrums. They're saying no. They're not eating as normal, and they're not going to sleep as normal. And I understand this can be quite alarming because I have been through it with having 4 children. I've been through it in many different ways, many different times throughout their lives. And I want to share some of the things that some of the ways in which this has happened to me, to sort of paint a picture that I have been through some of these things myself, and to be able to share what it has taught me. So I can remember a significant change happening in my now 11-year-old when he was about 7 years old. So my children had been sleeping with my husband and I in our room, and for many years bedtime was the same time every night. There was a routine, and we have been homeschooling for almost 12 years. So I was used to having a different routine than putting them to bed and having to get up and go to school. We didn't do any of that, though we did fall into our own routine with bedtime, and it was very predictable, and it provided a sense of comfort and security to know that at this time everybody's going to be asleep, and that means I get to go to sleep. And this all completely changed because when he was 7, my youngest, he just started not wanting to lay down in bed and fighting sleep. And this may seem like a bit of a shock to some people, but for about 2 years I fought him on this. And what I mean by that is I was in absolute disbelief that this was happening, because everything was turned upside down. It meant that I couldn't go to bed when I wanted to because he would often still want to stay up and play his computer games and be loud. And I tried lots of different things. I tried taking the screens away. I tried adding the screens for longer. I tried singing at bedtime. We told stories. We tried staying up a bit later, or we tried going to bed earlier. I tried waking him up early in the mornings so that he would be tired at night. I sought counselling. I questioned my thoughts. I read books. I did all sorts of things, and nothing was changing. He just no longer wanted to be told when to go to sleep. And eventually, after those 2 years of struggling, it felt like 2 years. It was sort of on and off. It wasn't every day for 2 years, but it was about that period of time that I was in strong resistance and fighting this change. And it wasn't until one day I just let go, and I realized that the only way through was acceptance. And we gave him his own room, and we allowed him to choose his bedtime with some rules, of course, about having some responsibility and not waking others up. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail because I wrote a book about our unschooling journey, and it includes this topic around sleep and my experiences. And I also do have a blog post that I wrote called Why My Children Don't Need a Bedtime, and that explains this process more deeply. However, I just wanted to share that once I found that place of acceptance in myself, everything changed. And there was no more fighting, and my son was very happy. There was no aggression in him anymore. And he was allowed to finally be who he wanted to be. So there's other things that have happened with my children. Things like I do have another child that is transgender, and that was a big change, deciding or realizing, in fact, that he wasn't who he thought he was or what everybody else thought he was. And that can be a very big shock for a parent to have raised this particular child as one gender, and then for them to completely abandon and reject that gender and be somebody else. And that's something that I had to learn a deep acceptance for as well. And so these are just some examples of changes which can be gradual or sudden, that can really shock our systems as parents. And what I've learned through all of this and all the many other ways, in fact, my children change every day, but it's no longer a shock to me when something that they've been doing or someone they've been being suddenly changes. I no longer react with shock or fear because I have learned what this means to me and the best way forward. They actually all sleep at different times. They all dress differently. They all like different things. They all behave differently. And they all have different feelings and moods that come out each day. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of hard work, a lot of inner work to get to this stage where it can all be accepted and allowed, and I can just be in the flow with all of these changes. So some other changes I just want to add could be changes in behaviour. It could be having a new friend at school and suddenly having attitude and talking back, or suddenly not wanting to go to daycare. Like children who are happy to go to daycare every day and then suddenly they don't want to. And there can be many reasons for all of these changes, but I find that as a parent, trying to figure out why, usually it's not an awareness that this is the child going through their own personal journey and they have needs that are not being met and they're trying to communicate that. What we tend to do instead as parents is try to find some kind of blame outside of ourselves, like the environment. And yes, of course, the environment and the people that our children are with and things that happen to them, traumas and certain experiences can shape them and cause change. So often we will try to find someone or something to blame, rather than when what's needed instead is this deep acceptance in ourselves that, for one, these are very real feelings that we are having as parents. They don't feel good. They are scary. They are terrifying. We feel we are losing our child. And those are very real feelings, and we need to meet those feelings with compassion and acceptance in ourselves. We need to let ourselves feel the pain and suffering of a perfect image that we had of our child suddenly disappearing. We need to accept that that's difficult for us, and we are allowed to feel upset or angry. So there's a difference between feeling those things and projecting those things onto our children. The second thing is we need to be able to have this higher perspective towards our children in accepting who they are. So we need to realize that we cannot control how our children turn out. We do have a level of control in the sense that our children's upbringing and the way that we treat them and the way that we behave around them is going to shape their perspectives in a way and their values, and it's going to impact how they view the world and themselves. But they are also individuals who are here on their own individual journey, living out their own individual life path with their own lessons to learn. And they have their own essence and soul, personality. Who they truly are is who they truly are. We cannot manipulate that, change that, stop that. All we can do is allow it. So the changes that are happening in our children, we might think something has caused it, something bad, when actually it could be that they are starting to discover their true selves. And especially with children who start to talk back and back chat and say no, perhaps they are discovering their sense of self and their boundaries, and they are starting to feel more comfortable expressing their desires and their needs. It can be difficult to accept the reality that maybe the child really doesn't want to be at daycare or go to school, or maybe they aren't needing an early bedtime, or maybe they don't want to go to that sports training, or maybe they don't like eating that certain food. So many times we may think that these changes in our children, they don't know what's best for them. We know what's best. So this tends to be behind a lot of the resistance and fighting we experience with them. And when we reject this and we try to make them stay where they are or as who they are, we are not allowing that natural growth and development of their true selves to emerge. And this can later in life lead to problems. If we just look at our own upbringing, if we can just for a moment pause and acknowledge, if we as children were allowed to express ourselves freely, who would we be today, having been allowed to develop our true selves naturally in an environment of acceptance and love, would we feel the same way about things, people, and ourselves the same way? So if we can acknowledge that in ourselves, then we can acknowledge that this is indeed what children need to develop their true sense of self. Is they need a space of acceptance and allowance. And all we can do as parents is every time we get a shock or a jolt, this doesn't mean we cannot discuss things with our children and talk to them and ask questions and be curious. But if we are not meeting ourselves first, we are going to them and we're projecting our emotions onto them, and we're trying to make it wrong or bad that they are in a time of change. So I have spent many years on the path of acceptance and allowance. I've done what I need to do to be in this place, and that has meant seeking help from professionals, having therapy to deal with my childhood wounds, because a lot of times if I'm triggered by what I'm seeing in my children, it's something that's within myself that's unhealed and has not been met with love and compassion. And how can I meet my children with love and compassion and acceptance if I've never known what that is for myself? So really the way into accepting change, because change is a constant, we want to hold on to reality as it is, but reality is always changing, just like the seasons and the weather. And we want to be in a space of moving with the change rather than against. Because when we move against the change, we suffer and we fight with our children, and we don't have that intimate connection that we so desperately desire as parents. So if we can learn through therapy or meditation or questioning what we're thinking or just sitting deeply with our feelings, we can learn over time to be in flow with the changes. And once we are there in a place of moving with our children through their changes, when we can see it as healthy and normal instead of unhealthy and abnormal, our relationships with our children really flourish. They trust us to be whoever they are in our presence, because they know that they are not going to be stopped or made wrong. They are going to be mirrored themselves back to them so that they can see and feel validated for who they are and what they are becoming. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next time for another podcast. Bye.